Composters? Really? Leopold Dakar asked, with a bemused grin spread over his lips. As he and his longtime squad mates walked toward the training chambers area, he glanced at the brown-haired woman who had become their fifth member, replacing Abacus Reed after, in his opinion, his idiotic but well-deserved death. The woman had yet to speak to them and stood apart by her lonesome, though he expected nothing else. Averting his eyes, he turned to Gregor, the shortest member of their group. "Hey, Gregor, now that Wyatt is a knight whatever-it, can he really pick and choose any name he wants?" "The name is unbecoming," Gregor Undaj commented, narrowing his eyes slightly. "But Lieutenant Wyatt is in his right to name his squadron whatever he sees it." "I'm relieved that he chose a simple name," he admitted. "I'd rather not belong to a fighter squadron called the Reverence of Eternal Glory ever again. My first squadron leader died in the midst of calling out his identification during a fight against pirates. Such a shameful death." Nultar Okara chuckled at that. "I, for one, like the name. Fear the garbage man," he barked a laugh, gaining a few stares from passing crew members. "Honestly, though, to think that the prince himself would elevate him to a knight. I almost couldn't believe what my eyes were seeing on the screen." Gregor nodded. "Very few are those that are risen to the rank of Knight Banneret. I must confess I am rather envious of Lieutenant Wyatt's position and circumstance." Leopold let out a whimsical sigh as his cheeks blushed. "I'd do anything to be under the direct command of the Princess and Lady Winfield. They're so beautiful, being near them would be payment enough." Gregor rolled his eyes while Nultar put an arm behind his neck. "Easy there, commoner scum. You might get your eyes gouged out if you stare at them for too long." Nultar barked out a laugh. "Though you ain't lying, they are stunningly beautiful, more so in person. Can you keep it in your pants? Romantic fraternization must be kept at a minimum. You know this. And fantasizing about such high-standing ladies? Absurd," Gregor added in a slightly annoyed tone. "Have some fun once in a while, Undaj. We ain't hurting no one, and they ain't here to hear it. You should try to open up once in a while. It'll loosen that stick of yours," Leopold replied. "Sides, you wish to be in Wyatt's position, don't you?" he asked with a mischievous grin. "My sexual preferences and desires are none of your concern," Gregor said, blushing slightly. "My envy comes from the fact that he is a Knight Banneret." "And you're, what was it, a baronet? Ain't that the same?" Leopold asked. "It couldn't be more different, you bumbling ignoramus," Gregor replied. "Gotta agree with Gregor here, Leo. Baronet and Banneret are entire star systems apart regarding how the noble ranking and structural system work. Technically speaking, a knighthood is the lowest nobility rank. In some parts of the Principality, first-generation knighthoods aren't official at all. It's only after the second generation that a proper house can be born, most of the time," Nultar explained. "That goes out of the window when a banneret ennoblement is involved." "What makes it so darn special anyway?" Leopold asked, and a gruff exhale caught their attention as Raquel Otilo hurried her pace to catch up to them. "You truly don't know anything about the structure of nobility?" she asked, her voice fierce yet elegant and slightly nasal, all with the tender touch of sandpaper on skin. "Hey, she talks," Leopold said, finishing with a chuckle and pointing a finger at himself. "Lady, I'm a commoner. All I learned about nobility is that blue blood pricks like Undaj over here are better than me, and I should always obey and all that dribble. So forgive my lack of knowledge." Gregor shook his head. "I'm terribly sorry, Lady Raquel. My companion is vociferously crude." Raquel groaned. "I understood that much after hearing him speak the first time, Undaj. I'm not stupid," said the pilot before focusing her attention back on Leopold. "Setting aside your ignorance and tongue, at least I can appreciate your attitude. Since I've grown tired of your rambling, I'll answer your question. In the societal structure of nobility, Undaj outranks Staples. But in terms of importance and standing, Staples outmatches Undaj. Do you understand?" "Not really," Leopold replied. "So Wyatt is beneath Gregor here, but also stands above him at the same time? How does that even work?" Gregor hummed deeply. It is a rather simple matter, Leopold. A knight banneret can only be elevated if at least one of two possible circumstances are met. The most common is if a high-standing member of a great house vouches for a commoner, pardoned exile, or lesser noble to receive such a title, and in return, two different royal houses give their favor and approval, he explained, raising a finger, then another. The second is how Lieutenant Wyatt achieved his title, to perform outstanding service to a royal house and have a member of royalty vouch in his favor. Saving the life of Her Majesty Princess Clara would be enough to at least consider such an honor. His performance as a pilot in both simulations and actual battles showcases his talent and skill, and his aid in uncovering the traitors within the fleet firmly cemented his elevation. I understand that, Gregor. What I want to know is what makes his title special. You seem to want it for yourself, if you could, Leopold countered. Can't say I blame Gregor for it. Heck, I'm pretty jealous myself, if I'm being honest. Such recognition is something that most low-standing nobles such as ourselves would give anything to achieve. Think about it this way, Leo, Noltar said, letting go of his friend. Anyone can buy or earn a knight title if they can afford it or earn it through service to a house or another. But a banneret knighthood is no joke. Last time it happened was around 5 years ago, and most of those aren't all that special because, wouldn't you know it, a lot of nobles like to make deals under the table. Our dashing lieutenant, though, got his title and ennoblement through deeds that will be written in goddamned history. If he survives long enough to have children, Raquel continued before Leopold could speak again, the rules of second generation are abolished, and he will establish his noble house with a solid foundation. Taking into consideration that he doesn't fall out of favor with his benefactors, House Astor itself, his house could very well be established as a rather powerful, rich, and influential minor house, the likes other houses of equal standing worked for centuries to achieve, likely using a healthy dose of backstabbings and political assassinations too. He'd be, and already is, the chagrin and envy of many nobles, envious bastards of his position, pretentious snakes ready to cuddle up to him, and fearful mongrels that see him as a dangerous rival to their own power and influence. Noltar clarified. So he's a big deal now, huh? Leopold asked after a few moments of pondering. Guess I should start calling him Lord or Lieutenant. I doubt he'll like it. He doesn't have the makings of a regular noble in him, Noltar said with a playful grin. Raquel shot the three men a long, silent glance before making her voice heard again. Disgraceful, she muttered, her throat rumbling with a low growl of anger. I should have guessed. You're his friends, aren't you? That's why he chose you to be a part of his squadron. Friends? Dear me, no, Noltar replied with a laugh. We met shortly before the ambush at Gintrax. Commander Redford appointed him as our squadron leader without much warning. We've been on a single mission together, he replied as Gregor and Leopold nodded in agreement. Raquel lost her hostile stance and was replaced by confusion. But you speak so highly of him? I had hoped that he was a man of talent and skill, one who gained his title through merit and actions alone. I was disheartened when I assumed he chose you due to some sort of political reasons. Why would he mingle with the lowly 27th-in-line candidate of a lesser house, a fallen noble whose only merits are found in a cockpit, and the worthless scum that is this commoner? Gregor asked pointedly. I love you too, asshole, Leopold answered with a smirk, while Noltar chuckled. Yeah, what he said. Wyatt was a commoner like me not too long ago. We don't know him much, but from what's happened so far, I like the guy. Down to earth, cold and calculative, yet decisive and creative, and a fantastic pilot. I'm glad he chose us as his squad mates. He must have seen something in you too, Raquel, Noltar added. Don't know what, though. Can't be your looks. Staples doesn't strike me as the kind of guy that goes after a pretty face. My guess is that he picked us because we worked together well during the battle. Noltar, the Blue Blood, and I have been squad mates for quite a while now. We had two other members, but one died because he deserved it, and he was a bastard. The other, Tristan, that same bastard pretty much killed because he was envious of him weeks before this whole damn mess started. We're as new to Wyatt as he is to us, Leopold contributed. Nothing has been set in stone, Gregor added. Lieutenant Wyatt may still replace us depending on our performances. A named fighter squadron is no small issue, even if our numbers are limited. Raquel sighed. It seems I owe the lieutenant an apology. I was reckless in my assumptions. That's why they're called assumptions, Otillo, Noltar replied. Get to know him more before you judge him, and I think that apology can go unmentioned. He blinked and straightened up. Look alive, he said, as they reached their destination. Entering the ample area dedicated to housing the training chambers, the four pilots took in the ambiance. It was still early in their training shift, so not many others were present. Deprived of the usual tense atmosphere found in later hours, the four of them walked with confidence. The quartet quickly found the black-haired sitting on a resting bench fiddling away at a data pad. When they were close enough, he took notice of them, set the pad away, and stood up. At once, the quartet stopped a scant 2 meters in front of Wyatt and gave him a quick salute. At ease, Wyatt dismissed as he examined his chosen squad mates. Gregor, Leopold, and Noltar were as he remembered them, with the addition of a glint in their eyes that wasn't there before. His focus shifted to his newest squad mate, Raquel Otillo. She was pretty, he had to admit. Her bronze skin, brown, short hair, gray cybernetic eyes, and fair facial features surely turned heads her way. She was slightly taller than him, perhaps by an inch or two, and her build was sturdy, strong, but retaining a measure of flexibility. All right, Noltar, Leopold, Gregor, this is the first time we've had a chance to talk after the trial, and now I can properly thank you. Thank you, all of you, for speaking on my behalf. I deeply appreciate it. My honor demanded it, for it was the right thing to do, sir, Gregor answered. And miss the chance to stick it up to a Reed? Don't mention it, sir. It was my pleasure, Noltar said with a dismissive air to his voice. I only said what was true. No more, no less. We commoner scum have to stick together, right? Leopold finished with a wink and a cocky smirk. Wyatt smiled internally as he raised a hand. I'm not a commoner anymore. It feels so wrong to say that still. He shook his head briefly. Raquel Otillo, I'd like to welcome you to the newly formed Composters Squadron. I shall be Composter 1. Noltar, you'll be Composter 2. Gregor, Composter 3. Leopold will be Composter 4, and Raquel, our newest member, you are Composter 5. All right, Wyatt, so far so good. My hands are shaking, and I feel something coiling in my stomach. Why? Why does this feel so damn different? Wyatt asked himself as he tried not to fumble over his own words. By order of Commander Redford Kalin, we are to be the veteran fighter squadron of the Noir Navio under the service of Princess Clara herself. I will tolerate no disputes, nor will I accept any excuses. Understood? Sir, yes, sir, the four pilots replied. This is harder than I thought. Keep your composure, Wyatt. You already led Epsilon Squadron before. There shouldn't be any great difference. He paused for a moment, feeling his heart pound hard against his chest, threatening to burst out at any second. Then why am I feeling like this? What's wrong with me? He thought, as he moved his hands behind his back to hide his trembling. If we are to be exemplars, then we need to work together in tandem. I've read your inf dossiers and I have chosen you due to your experience, skills, and teamwork. Raquel, you and I are the odd ones out. Most of my combat experience comes from routine patrols and now the training chambers. Your combat experience is more extensive, but your tendency to seek fights with others must stop. Or am I to seek another member? Wyatt asked as firmly as he could manage, but he couldn't stop a slight tremble from escaping. As long as I am not antagonized unfairly, Raquel replied, then added after a moment of hesitation, Sir. Suddenly feeling heavy and hot, Wyatt nodded. For the next 2 hours, we shall train in joint simulated scenarios so that I may assess our combat effectiveness. We'll enter a training chamber each and link together for that purpose. Let's do our best, he said, not knowing how else to end his order. Turning to the nearest training chamber, he grabbed his datapad and made his way into it without turning to see his squad members. I can do this. I can do this. I've led patrol shifts before. I've been on my own hauling compost, and I led a squadron during a battle. A simulation shall be easy in comparison. I can do this. Leading won't be difficult. I even commanded the Nornavio against the Drazen. I can do this, Wyatt reassured himself before putting on his helmet and sitting on the chair. The systems came to life, and after a few seconds of getting used to the feeling of the chamber, he made his choice as soon as the others linked with his system. It was time to begin. No, Noltar, take out the satellite to the left, Wyatt ordered, as the chaos around him unfurled. Sir, I don't have any missiles left, Noltar replied, and the drones are chasing me. Raquel, support Nultar, Wyatt ordered, barely registering that a drone tore at his shields, nearly depleting them before he could respond and turn the drone into punctured slag. Not possible! I'm going down! I'm going— The connection died as her fighter exploded, joining Leopold in the waiting lobby. Gregor, is the mine ready? Wyatt shouted in desperation as another drone was destroyed, but his shields were now gone. As he weaved through space, doing his best to. It is, sir, but I'm not in range to deploy it yet, Gregor replied with a tremor in his voice. I need someone to cover. Too late. Defense systems have spotted me. I can't— And with that, he too was gone. Wyatt gritted his teeth as he saw Nultar's fighter pursued by 5 drones through his tactical display. The drones released a volley of missiles that tore through whatever was left of his shields, and in a series of explosions, Nultar was gone, leaving him alone. His solitude didn't last long, though. His fighter shuddered as it was pierced by a barrage of bullets, and the screen went black. Damn it, Wyatt cursed, hitting the armrests of his chair with both fists in pure anger seconds before the message, "Failure," appeared before his view screen. Angrily, he looked at the clock and noticed that the 2 hours set for their simulations had already passed. His eyes turned to the screen showing the result of their training, and grimaced when every single simulation tested was marked as failed. Practically tearing off his helmet and stepping outside the training chamber, he was met by his squad mates, and they all froze when they saw him, saluting him. Stand down, he said, and moved to a nearby bench, sitting there for a moment, allowing his frustration to peel away. A whole minute passed in silence with his squad mates standing near him, but refusing to leave or even talk. Then he realized his mistake. Ah, right. I'm terribly sorry. You're dismissed. You may tend to your other duties and schedules. I'll review the data later. Sir? The 4 of them replied before leaving him be. The pilot watched them go and noticed them talking and murmuring once they were outside his hearing range. Great. I somehow screwed up so much that they are going to think I'm some sort of liar, he thought, as a groan escaped his throat and a headache assaulted his brain. Standing up, he walked out of the room and made his way to the gym, walking aimlessly as his head pounded, his heart raced in his chest, and he felt cold, like he was shivering across his entire body. His legs felt weak, his shoulders heavy, his hands didn't stop shaking, and his stomach was doing somersaults. He ignored other crew members as he walked, barely registering their presence for what felt like an eternity until a voice called to him. Lieutenant Wyatt? Wyatt stopped at the familiar voice and turned to face Galt Tirome, who was looking at him with a mixture of worry and elation. Ah, Galt Tirome. Good day, Wyatt replied, trying and failing to regain a sense of composure and professionalism. Is there anything that you need? No, Lieutenant. I was making my way to the mess hall. Why are you heading to storage bay number 3? Galt asked, concerned. I am, Wyatt exclaimed, surprised. Looking up, he found a sign that indeed marked that he was heading to said area. I wasn't aware I lost my way. I was heading to the gymnasium for my daily training session with Cynthia, he said, bereft of emotions and with a shaky voice. I see, Galt replied and took a step forth. Lieutenant, are you all right? You're sweating and you're shaking. Perhaps you should visit the medical wing. Perhaps I will. I don't feel well. To tell you the truth, I've been feeling unwell these past few days, Lieutenant Commander. I don't know why. Perhaps I've fallen ill or eaten something that infected me with a parasite. Wyatt pondered. Galt stared Wyatt in the eye for several seconds before asking in a more serious tone. May I see your hands, Lieutenant? The pilot obeyed without hesitation, showing the red-haired man a head taller than him his hands. Galt's expression softened after seeing them, and the noble let out a relieved sigh. Come with me, Wyatt. I think I know what's happening to you. Again, Wyatt obeyed instantly, and for some reason it made him feel better. He followed Galt for several minutes into the storage bay where small drones flew by and regular crew members went on doing their duties, stopping only to salute them as they walked past them. Galt led Wyatt to a more secluded area of the bay and sat down on a sealed box. Wyatt did the same, sitting next to the red-haired man. What's happening to me? Wyatt asked a second later, bringing up his shaking hands. I feel as if I could fall down at any moment. Am I sick? Galt shook his head and gave him a reassuring smile. You're not sick, Wyatt Staples. May I call you by your name? Yeah, I don't mind, Wyatt replied, nodding several times in quick succession. So, if I'm not sick, then what's wrong with me? Tell me, do your fingertips tingle? Galt asked, and Wyatt nodded quickly. Wyatt, do you not know what anxiety is? Anxiety? Wyatt repeated, his voice barely a whisper. I'm no stranger to feeling anxious, but never like this. How is it even possible? Galt visibly relaxed, which in turn made Wyatt ease up. You're suffering from an anxiety attack, Wyatt. You have all the symptoms related to it. I've seen it happen before many times. To be honest, I'm astonished that you, after what I've seen you do, would be prey to such a thing. Tell me, do you know what caused it? I wouldn't be here otherwise, Galt, Wyatt retorted angrily, a heavy frown marking his features. He raised his hands and buried his face against his shaking palms. I spent 2 hours training with my squad members and I fumbled every simulation. I made mistakes so many times I couldn't concentrate and failed to recognize targets or take advantage of opportunities. I lost to drones, Galt. Drones, Wyatt confessed, his breathing rapidly increasing. I killed them all 20 times over because I'm an awful squadron leader. Pulling back, his eyes were wide and his shaking increased. The prince made a mistake. See, Clara made a mistake. I shouldn't be a knight band. Whatever. I'm a filthy commoner. I'm not a noble. I shouldn't be a noble. Nobles lead. Commoners obey. I obey. I obey. I obey. He repeated until his teeth began to chitter, suddenly overtaken by a cold sweat that made him dizzy. I can't command. I'm a commoner. That's all I'll ever be. A worthless commoner. Galt listened, watching the black-haired man closely until he stopped talking. Breathe in and exhale slowly, Wyatt, he said after several seconds of hearing Wyatt's ragged breathing. Close your eyes and focus on breathing. Trust me, it helps. Wyatt obeyed, latching onto the given command like a man drowning trying to remain afloat. As he focused on breathing, Galt continued to talk. After you killed Samuel Cayston, I thought you were a dangerous, unhinged, honorless individual, Galt said in a calm, tranquil tone. After you revealed that you were a commoner, my perception of you shifted entirely. I and my companions were at your mercy, and you displayed both restraint and humbleness. Don't reply. Focus on breathing. Let me speak, he commanded, when Wyatt opened his eyes and turned to him. The pilot nodded and returned to what he was doing. It wasn't until your inspiring valor and determination to fight against the Drazan Raider that I understood that you were a man of integrity and courage, Wyatt. And I made the fatal mistake of seeing you as a figure of legend, the likes the Principality has not seen in centuries, not even counting the lone wolves. Galt smiled widely, his expression softening. Seeing you take command of the Noir Navio and the way you fought against those monsters, it has been the greatest feat of my life so far to have been able to aid you in that battle, Wyatt. You took command over an entire destroyer-class vessel and made use of it in ways I couldn't have imagined. You're different from all other captains, commodores, and commanders I've served under throughout my career. And your performance against the traitors? To see the prince himself declare you a knight banneret? He shook his head. Forgive me, Wyatt. I focused on your achievements and formed a version of you in my head that was entirely fantastical. I forgot that you are a mere human, just as I am. Wyatt listened intently to Galt's words, each sentence forcing down the awful sensations and feelings he was experiencing. I feared for your life, this is true. You spared my life and gave me a chance to see my daughter again. You risked your life not just for me, but for my surviving comrades and friends when you didn't have to, even going so far as to defy the orders given by Princess Clara herself. Samuel did his duty. You did yours. But your motives were entirely different. For that, Lieutenant, I thank you. I thank you for saving our lives. Galt paused for a moment to take a deep breath through his nose. When I was younger, merely an ensign, a botched assault on pirates turned awry. We were boarded. I should have died that day. Instead, a commoner from the Auxilia sacrificed herself to save my life. I didn't know her. She didn't know me. She just performed her duty as what was expected of her. But I didn't see it like that. From my childhood, I was taught that the commoners were beneath us nobles, that our bloodlines, intellect, power, influence, and wealth were far superior, and thus commoners lived to serve us above all else. Nobles lead, commoners obey. A core tenet of the Principality, is it not? Galt let out a tired, sad laugh. And here you are, a commoner, a refuse and compost hauler turned knight banneret. The red-haired man let out another chuckle. Wyatt, you may not believe me, but nobles and commoners, we're not that different. We're humans, all of us. Regardless of our standing and our societal rules, we're human at the end of the day. Wyatt opened his eyes and his mouth went agape, wanting to protest, but his brain beat him to the punch. How many times had he sneered at prim, holier-than-thou nobles? How many times had he compared their skills against his own back at the academy? A noble could die as easily as a commoner, bleed like one, struggle like one even if their struggles were not the same. He closed his mouth and his racing heart began to slow down. The tingles faded, and his shaking hands slowly but surely came to a halt. "But I failed," the pilot countered. "I failed to lead them effectively." "Did you?" Galt asked, bemused. "From what I've learned, you didn't fail to lead Epsilon Squadron in battle. Nor did you fail to lead the Noir Navio in the battle against the Drazan. So what's different now? Is it because you're a noble?" What changed? Wyatt asked himself, as his headache became less and less prevalent, and he could feel his usual calm, collected mind return to normal. The change is that I'm a noble. But what does that really mean? Clara thinks I'm valuable. Redford is teaching me how to be a commander, giving me my own squadron to lead and oversee. I'm sure that means that he'll put more duties on me in time, which means he has a measure of trust in me now. The prince elevated me. He even came to see me in my cell personally. And Cynthia is training me, teaching me what she can. For whatever reason I can't see, but she does it anyway. I'm not worthless, am I? He asked himself, feeling that same wave of calm and relaxation he felt the first time he thought that it could be a possibility. Galt placed a hand on his shoulder and offered a reassuring smile. It won't be easy. Command and leadership are difficult things to perform correctly, and everyone has their own way to do it. Some lead through fear. Some stick to the rules and traditions, refusing to deviate from them. Others don't even bother with it themselves, always delegating their duties to their underlings. Some learn how to do it, some are naturally talented, and some lead through example. It is up to you to decide what type of commanding officer you'll be, Wyatt. Wyatt nodded slowly. I think I understand, Galt. Thank you. I feel much better now. He finished with a heavy but relieved exhalation. I don't suppose you have some advice for me? My only advice is that you must always remember that there will be lives under your charge, and that you must do your best to avoid losing them needlessly. Let your peers see your values and best traits portrayed through your orders, command abilities, and your decisions. Never be afraid to ask for a second opinion, but always be firm in whatever decision you make. His eyes narrowed warningly. There are eyes following you now, Wyatt. What you've achieved is a great thing, and very few are happy about it. Do not show weakness. Stand firm. Stand tall. Let your detractors cower and bicker while you continue to grow. And know that I, Galt Tirome, will be happy to aid you if you were to need me, Lieutenant Wyatt Staples. Galt? Wyatt stared at the older man for several seconds, finding no deception in his voice or eyes. Then he smiled. Thank you. For everything. With nothing more to say, the two men left the storage area, and with a final firm shaking of hands, they went to their original destinations. Wyatt stumbled into his quarters as half of his body screamed in pain, but for the first time since the hellish training with Cynthia began, he didn't complain about it. He kept repeating the words Galt had shared with him, and while it didn't extinguish his anxiety, he could pinpoint what was wrong with him. Before his ennoblement, he obeyed orders all his life ever since he could remember. He had been taught that only nobles could truly lead and command, never a lowly commoner like himself. It had always been so easy, obey a plan of assault or commands given to him by petty blue bloods. His capacity to make personal decisions was his and his alone, but he had never been outspoken about it. He rarely had to issue orders, but when he did, it was due to exceptional circumstances. Only his hatred of the Drazan had clouded his mind during the battle, allowing him to take command of the Noir Navio, since that meant Drazan would die and countless lives, that of his princess above all else, could be spared from their predation. Command won't be easy, and I still feel unsure if I can truly do it, but I will at least try my best. Lives will depend on me from now on, and I can't let Commander Redford down just because of my insecurities, he mumbled to himself. and just as he was about to remove his uniform, he noticed a small basket and a data chit resting on his nightstand. Cautiously, he removed the cover from the basket and smiled when he saw a selection of pastries and other baked sweets he had come to love. "Thank you, Clara," he said softly before turning his attention to the data chit, wondering what it could contain. Deciding that he could shower later, he grabbed a delectable chocolate cake from the basket, sat on the edge of his bed, and picked up the data chit, connecting it to his personal data pad. His eyes went wide when he saw its contents. His shower was pushed back for a few hours more. Wyatt stood once more before the aged Commander Redford, awaiting his verdict. After several seconds that felt like ages passed, Redford let out a deep hum of approval and a single nod. "I approve of it," he finally said. "I shall send it to Princess Clara at the end of my duties. As captain, she will decide if it is ultimately adequate or not, Wyatt. However, how were you able to correct your errors so quickly? We won't reach the jump point until tomorrow, and then it will be another 2 days of travel before our arrival at Matcha. You still had time to work on your heraldic shield." "I spent several hours thinking and reviewing data after my shift ended, Commander," Wyatt replied firmly. "I think my chosen design speaks of who I am and my best traits." The commander shook his head slowly. "I have a keen suspicion as to who aided you in making a proper choice. Regardless, I find no faults with it, and it was done by your own hand," Redford replied with the ghost of a smirk on his lips. "Now that this issue is resolved, I wanted to ask you about the results your squadron obtained yesterday. You seem to have a proclivity for going above and beyond, Lieutenant Wyatt Staples. Only in this case, your failures in the simulated exercises are so catastrophic that I struggle to remember a performance such as what I've witnessed." His eyes narrowed slightly. "What happened, Lieutenant?" "I made a mistake, sir," Wyatt replied without hesitation nor shame. "I was unwell. According to Galt Tirom, I was suffering from what he described as an anxiety attack," he confessed. "There's no point in lying to him anyway. Better to tell him things for what they are." He thought a moment before continuing. "I made several mistakes, caused multiple errors. I couldn't focus on anything, not even my own performance, sir." Redford leaned back on his chair. "Many would rather lie or make up excuses before admitting a fault on their performance, Lieutenant. You've shown me integrity, and I hope that you do not lose it as you gain experience and renown," he commented, ending with an approving nod. "Have you identified your mistakes?" "I like to believe that I have, Commander. If there's anything you can aid me with in this regard, I'd appreciate it. I serve Princess Clara now, and I do not wish to embarrass her with piss-poor performances caused by my lack of attention and commoner ignorance," replied the pilot as he straightened a little more. "A good commanding officer listens to his subordinates, Wyatt. However, that doesn't mean that you have to rely on their opinions to make a decision. Never narrow your field of view, but remain firm in your choices. You will be obeyed because you are their leader, and many a fledgling officer falters in this regard for many reasons. First and foremost, the power and standing get to their heads, blinding them. I count myself as lucky that you lack that sort of ambition, yet your ignorance and lack of training are an equally fatal flaw that can, thankfully, be dulled, deformed, and forged into something worthwhile as you gain experience," said the gray-haired man. "Seek to strengthen those under your charge. Do you understand?" "Seek to strengthen those under my care," Wyatt repeated as he thought deeply about what Redford was trying to teach him. There was a message there, but he couldn't see it clearly. His cynical part spoke first. Why should he? Nultar, Leopold, and Gregor had helped him, sure, but ever since he returned home from that most terrible encounter with the Drazan, no one except his family and a few precious neighbors had helped him. How many times had he seen his fellow commoners kicking the proverbial ladder behind them just to stop others from reaching them? How many times had the news spoken about this or that noble house feuding with one another or having their members found dead in tragic accidents? No one had helped him in the academy. Why should he help them at all? But as soon as those thoughts formed in his mind, he destroyed them with the precision of a burst of coil gun fire. Even if that was the case, which isn't, if we work together closely and become a solid unit, that will only make us all stronger and increase our chances of survival and victory. As the Nornavio's most veteran squadron, we must be up to par in service of Princess Clara. I will not disappoint her or Commander Redford." He frowned for a moment. "Think, Wyatt. What did you do wrong yesterday? Anxiety be damned, where did I mess up? My orders were uncoordinated for one. My attention was too divided to focus on anything, and I didn't trust them to—" Wyatt's eyes widened as realization struck him, and he suddenly felt the urge to punch himself for his stupidity. "I understand, Commander," he replied after a few seconds of silence. Redford nodded once in response. "You are dismissed. Continue your training with your squad mates. I will expect a report on your observations regarding their faults, their strengths, and their aptitudes. Ignore their dossiers and use only what you can perceive," the aged commander ordered in a firm tone. "Sir," Wyatt replied, saluting his commanding officer before leaving his quarters that, apparently, doubled as his office. The pilot then made his way to the training chambers area, all the while thinking over and over what he would say to his squad members, but as he neared his destination, he threw his planned words aside. "If I am to apologize to them, then I won't let my words be a mere rehearsal," he concluded with determination. Entering the room, a trio of nobles stood near the entrance. Given their badges, 2 were Marines, while the 3rd was a technician. Looking closer at their rank insignias, he recognized that the odd one out was a chief technician, most likely one working on the engines of the ship or its weapon systems. The 2 Marines were more difficult to read, since he had little interaction with their branch of the Royal Navy, but he was certain that one was a first lieutenant. His instincts kicked in, and he stepped aside, giving them ample berth and slightly lowering his head in submission. "Looks like a commoner will always be a commoner, no matter the laurels set on its head," the technician said, crossing her arms tightly against her uniform. Her companions snickered at her words but said nothing. For his part, Wyatt ignored her comment and focused on what mattered. Leaving the trio behind, he made his way to the same bench he had used the day prior, and was surprised when he found the members of his squadron already waiting for him, all 4 of them chatting idly, and yet to notice his presence. He felt a wave of anxiety and dread fill his chest, but now that he knew what his sickness was, he could fight against it. A deep breath and a sound exhale later washed away his worries, just in time for Leopold to notice his approach. It was almost comical how his fellow commoner jumped to his feet and gave a crisp salute, only to be shortly followed by his 3 comrades. "I'm never going to get used to being saluted, am I?" Wyatt wondered as he came to a halt before his squad members. "At ease," he commanded, and they obeyed. "We will run through more simulations and work on our cohesion. Our performance yesterday was terrible," he said bluntly as Gregor and Raquel flinched at his words. "And it was entirely my fault." "Pardon?" Noltar exclaimed after a second or two of stunned silence. "Sir, you did nothing wrong. We couldn't adapt to your orders." "We did our best and we failed," Leopold added. "Those were simulations, so we can try again, sir." Wyatt raised a hand, silencing them and any further comment they may have. "Let me speak and be honest with you all. Our performance yesterday was entirely my fault," he began, his expression serious, unflinching. He felt oddly at peace instead of agitated. Smiling internally, he continued, "I was feeling unwell, more than unwell, in fact. Was a commoner not too long ago. I have been thrust into a position that was never intended for someone like me. Among you, I trust you will understand what I'm saying, Leopold." The scarred, black-haired pilot gave a solid nod. "Yesterday, I was suffering from an anxiety attack that hindered me to the point that it made me ineffective. It resulted in our complete and total loss," Wyatt confessed without shame, and saw that Raquel was shocked. Gregor was aghast. Leopold seemed to realize something, and Noltar was initially shocked, but his expression shifted to one of approval a second later. "However, that does not excuse my greatest fault." "Sir?" Raquel muttered, barely believing what she was hearing. The 3 longtime friends shared a quick, puzzled look. "My greatest mistake is that I did not trust you to take action yourselves," said Wyatt, ending with a frustrated sigh. "I never once allowed your skills to shine, and I tried to guide your fighters as if it was me in your cockpits, not you. For that, I apologize, and I assure you I will not make that mistake again," he finished by giving them a respectful salute. If we are to be squadron, then we will need to trust each other and know our strengths and limitations. Sir, please allow me, Gregor asked, and Wyatt nodded. Sir, as our squadron leader and direct commanding officer, we are to obey your orders. It is you who will decide our actions. Wyatt frowned slightly at that. And what did we achieve thanks to that? I was not sound of mind, but my error remains. I will listen to your opinions, and you shall obey my orders, but I will not try to guide your hands as if they were my own. If I did that, what would I want to lead a squadron at all when I could remain alone? The 4 pilots before him didn't reply for several seconds until he straightened his posture. If there are no further objections, let us commence. Sir, was their unified reply. Wyatt flew past some debris, easily dodging it. A smile spread his face when 2 drones exploded after colliding with fragments of what had once been a spaceship in their pursuit. On his tactical display, he saw that Raquel, Leopold, and Nultar were equally engaged and had suffered minimal damage at worst. Meanwhile, Gregor was floating dead in space as his fighter slowly tumbled toward the satellite that the drones were protecting, camouflaging itself as more loose debris. His communication feed was silent, a sharp contrast to the day prior where the constant cries for orders, clarifications, and desperate cries for help broke his focus, sinking further into the abyss of conflicting emotions he had been thrown into. Without that whirlpool clouding his mind, he could focus on what he knew to do best: piloting. A simulation wasn't the real thing, but it came close enough to trick his mind into giving his best. Above all else, he felt relaxed now that he avoided micromanaging his squad members' actions at every waking moment. He gave them orders to follow, but issued no further instructions on how they were to follow them, allowing them the chance to let their skills shine through. The first few simulations were a failure, but one that was intentional, allowing him to measure their level of independence, and quickly found that Gregor Undaj was the most inflexible of the group. He lacked imagination, initiative, and creativity, despite his notable skill during dogfights. On the flip side, he followed orders to the letter, and never once questioned his authority. Twice, he ordered him to do nothing. Once he ordered him to act as a distraction, knowing he would die in the process, and once left him without orders. He obeyed without question, but in the last experiment, he was utterly lost. He, however, had an aversion to any underhanded tactics, but still obeyed any orders given. Hence why he had the slightly rotund man perform those same tactics more than the others. Raquel Otillo, much like her dossier indicated, was nearly the exact opposite of Gregor. She obeyed his commands, that much was certain, but she questioned his orders if she felt like her skills could be put to better use elsewhere. Her greatest strength came in the form of her quick maneuvers, her over-reliance on trickery, and her evasive skills. He liked that about her. However, she was brash and often overreached her objectives, always trying to be the one who scored the most kills. She was an active tactical mind and had the subtlety of one. He quickly learned that passive roles, such as scouting or running silent, were met with protests. Not to mention, she always volunteered to be the one to carry the most dangerous objective. He wasn't sure if her thirst for combat came from the need to be the best, or if she sought to shower herself in glory and honors. If it was the latter, then he'd have to seek a replacement. Seeing Leopold Dakar in action was a surprise. He half expected his fellow black-haired, brown-eyed commoner to share his same values in combat. Obey orders to your best capacity, do your best to achieve victory, and make use of your advantages as much as possible. But no. To his surprise, Leopold wasn't a good fighter. He had the skill to dodge, evade, and run away from danger on point. In fact, he'd be hard-pressed to match him in those areas, but in actual fighting, he wasn't good at all. He preferred to stay away and use his missiles and his tactical mind to fight and make ambushes. He was also more adept at scouting and running silent, preferring those low-risk assignments. But the role he shone in was as a support wing. Every time he was forced to be alone, he crumbled and preferred to flee or hide. But if he had one or more partners, he provided excellent support, confusing the enemy, taking out missiles, and so much more. In one of the simulations, Wyatt remembered that Leopold had been at his side the most during the battle against the Kaystan forces, always ready to provide support. Finally, Nultar Olkara was another not-so-pleasant surprise. The greenish-haired man with a strong jawline was a man who excelled in hit-and-run strikes. Fierce and resourceful, Nultar proved to be a headache to his opponents, often employing trickery, traps, and the terrain to his advantage if available. Using a haywire mine to simultaneously disable several dozens of drones during a chase through an asteroid field was a trick that had never crossed his mind. He made sure to remember and use it if the need arose. He was biased and preferred the use of tactical mines due to their versatile and destructive potential, but now he was beginning to see more value, and many possible applications in the haywire mines. Sadly, Nultar Olkara was, to put it bluntly, a show-off. Unlike Raquel, who craved battle, Nultar boasted his skill and actively put himself in danger unnecessarily. Wyatt could feel the sting of irony given his track record, but his fallen noble squad member was worse. Sure, he put his life in danger constantly, but that was out of necessity, and he wasn't sure he'd survive his desperate ploy. Simulation or not, Nultar seemed more preoccupied with doing risky maneuvers, drawing attention to himself. And more than once he had sacrificed himself for the sake of the mission when it wasn't even necessary. Gregor is too straightforward and tries to follow some useless code of honor. Raquel enjoys the thrill of battle a bit too much and probably is a glory seeker, and has no problem voicing her opinions. I'll have to keep an eye on her, I think, Wyatt thought before turning 2 drones into scrap and launching a missile to take down a third that was giving chase to Leopold's fighter. Leopold is better in a supportive role and would rather avoid fighting if necessary. Is it cowardice or mere survival? Can't be the former, or else he wouldn't be here at all. Nultar is a wild card with a death wish if his actions are anything to go by. Wyatt's train of thought was interrupted when he noticed Gregor's fighter come to life, quickly adjusting its trajectory and then burning toward the satellite. The PD turrets of the satellite were quick to act, but it was too late regardless. Gregor peppered it with a quick burst, taking out its shields before 2 missiles finished the job. The simulation ended moments later, earning a solid victory, and a smile spread across his face. "It's not a perfect score by any means, but this time the failures were intentional," he said to himself, content that from the 20 varied simulations, 6 resulted in success. As he stepped out of his training chamber, his squad members were also doing the same and quickly rushed to stand before him. Clearing his throat, he focused on them. "Stand down. Our performance today was as it should have been yesterday. I'll review the data obtained for further analysis. Composters, you're dismissed." "Sir!" The 4 pilots said in unison in a much firmer tone than the previous day as they gave their leader a firm salute. As Wyatt watched them go, he gave out a deep mental sigh. Okay, I think I got what I needed out of them, so what am I supposed to do now? Gregor will be the easiest, but the others? What can I even do to help them improve? Wyatt questioned himself a moment before a voice came through his Ontoro implant.
"Wyatt, this is Cynthia. Our training shall be postponed. Present yourself bearing your combat armor in 1 hour. We shall focus on something else today."
"Combat armor?" he muttered after hearing the orders of the blue-haired woman. "My regular pilot armor isn't actual combat armor," he said, and a sinking feeling emerged from his stomach. He was unable to suppress a chuckle escaping his throat before he made his way back to his quarters. When he arrived, he wasn't entirely surprised to find a set of actual combat armor often used by officers, veteran Marines, and ROSF units lying on his bed. Much to his dismay, there was no basket in sight this time. "I should have saved some sweets yesterday," he commented as he closed his door and locked it. The set of armor wasn't anything like the sort of armor Commander Redford, Cynthia, or the Royal Marines wore, but it was still better than the regular standard-issue suits and armor enlisted commoners received, and even better than what low-ranking nobles could afford. Being a warrant officer at least ensured his equipment was slightly better, with his helmet being the best part of his previous armor. "How am I going to pay for this?" Wyatt murmured as he picked up the helmet and inspected it. Like the rest of the armor, it was largely dark gray-colored, with only his name tag, rank insignia, the banner of the Principality, and his badge denoting him as a pilot breaking the otherwise dullness of the armor. Putting it on took only a few minutes since he was not in a hurry and immediately felt the difference compared to his previous armor. The armor alone was significantly heavier as it provided more protection without sacrificing his mobility. He jumped a few times, testing it out, each stomp echoing in his room with a heavy, solid thud. Activating his helmet's HUD, he focused on the left side and found what he was looking for. His shield was disengaged, but it at least doubled the capacity of his previous armor. Not to mention that his new armor had a single dosage of biofoam and 2 combat stimulants. His stomach churned with discomfort as his treacherous thoughts assaulted him, but he managed to push back against them. I'm a commoner no longer, but I'm not a damned blue blood either. I'm Wyatt Staples, pilot of the Royal Navy, loyal son of the Principality, and Knight Banneret of House Astor. Princess Clara shall not find me wanting. I hope, said the man as his sudden burst of bravado dwindled. Folding his uniform and storing it properly, he left his quarters and made his way to the gym where Cynthia was waiting for him. He would arrive early since he had nothing else to do in the meantime. Now that I think about it, I should go down the firing range and practice my shooting, too. I appreciate everything Cynthia is doing for me, but I'm far better with a rifle than with my fists, he commented in a whisper, gently nodding at the crew members who saluted him as he walked past them. When he arrived at the gym, he found the usual activities on set. Everyone had to perform at least an hour of exercise daily, but how they went around it was their own concern, unless medical reasons were involved. Bikes, bench presses, treadmills, sparring rings, and arenas, and more could be found both in use and free after being cleaned out by service staff. To his surprise, though, he found the Icontis were making use of the installations this time around. Many humans didn't approach them, but some among them were friendly enough to the small but dexterous aliens. He quickly spotted Jincho running on a treadmill at a speed that no human could ever hope to match. I might not get another chance like this one in a long time, so I better make use of it, the pilot thought and turned in their direction. As he approached the Iconti, the others around him, humans included, stiffened and quickly turned to salute him. At ease. No need for that when I'm not in service, Wyatt replied in a more mellow tone of voice while Jincho slowly decelerated. Your name was Jincho, was it? And you're the worm brain that wrecked that beautiful fighter, Jincho replied in between panting breaths. It took him a couple of seconds to come to a complete halt, but when he did, he jumped down the treadmill, landing right in front of Wyatt. Crossing his arms, he looked up at the pilot with all 6 eyes. Need something? The chirping, guttural noises of the Iconti were like a backdrop when the rather lively translator all but plucked the noises the alien made and turned them into the Principality's official language. Not really, Wyatt replied, letting his guard down and taking a seat on the nearby empty bench. His tone and actions seemed to relax the other Icontis and the 5 humans in their midst. Without their badges and rank insignias, he couldn't tell to what branch or division they belonged. Perhaps they're all technicians since they're together, he guessed. Bah, not really, he says, Jincho replied with a playful rasp of his throat. You humans are very bad liars, better than the hierarchy, though. Much better than the corpse-eating Drazen. Hate them, every last one of them. Murderers. The Arabians can die in a hole for all I care. And just like that, Wyatt smiled under his helmet and vowed to befriend the technician and his compatriots. Doing his best to hide his enthusiasm, he reached for his helmet and slowly removed it so he could face them directly. Ugh, you're uglier in person, Jincho jabbed as his vestigial wings fluttered in good humor. You're not precisely good-looking either, Jincho, Wyatt replied in a similar tone. I believe we met before already, but it was hardly formal. My name is Wyatt Staples, he said, offering his right hand. Pleasure to meet you. That goes for all of you, too. Jincho, best technician you'll ever meet. These here are Illa, Koratu, Jer, Zimu, Alchu, Feshik, and Bibuhu. Our human companions are David, Louis, Monica, Fair, and Carter, part of our team. I'm their boss, Jincho boasted as he introduced everyone in turn, pointing at them each. You're our unit's overseer, you flightless bastard, replied one of the men. Excuse him, Lieutenant. Jincho here doesn't know when to shut up. Our first meeting led me to conclude that, Wyatt replied, ending with a chuckle. Though that reminds me of something you did, Jincho. You hacked my helmet easily. Why? Jincho huffed, eyes narrowing. How else was I supposed to give you a piece of my mind after you mistreated that poor fighter so badly? Besides, it wasn't hard at all. Principality tech is subpar most of the time. But this ship? He looked around before stomping his left foot on the ground a few times while his tail swayed agitatedly. The hierarchy would kiss my ass if it meant they got a hold of it. Fat chance. Fuck the hierarchy, haha. Wyatt turned to the nearest Ikanti, Feshik, a female, and raised an eyebrow. Is he always this full of energy, Feshik? The Ikanti nodded rapidly. He's been scurrying all over the ship ever since we got on board and clearance to do our work. The pilot nodded in understanding. I must confess, I would be too if I were a technician. I've never seen a ship like the Noir Navio, not even in history archives. Sadly, while I can understand how magnificent it is, I'm a pilot. Technology and I don't mingle all too well. Right, Jincho exclaimed, eyes and beak opened widely. There's always room for improvement, but the geniuses that made this ship knew their stuff. It is almost sad that it is equipped with principality weaponry. The good kind, sure, but other than the spinal particle beam, I shudder just imagining what this gorgeous lady could achieve. Suddenly, the Ikanti smacked his chest and shook his head violently for a few seconds. Buddy talk for later. I know why you're here. You want to know how's your fighter, right? Well, I already learned what I wanted from him. Hates the hierarchy and is damn good at what he does. That's all I needed to know. So why does he think I'm here to ask about the fighter? Wyatt thought, choosing to raise an eyebrow in response to his question. She'll fly again! I finished working on her this morning, criminal. You fried her internal systems, the damn gyro was out of sync, somehow you managed to overload the shield generator, and the afterburners were little more than scrap. How were you able to land without it falling apart? He asked after listing his crimes. Doesn't matter. Your fighter is good and ready, better than new because it was I, Jincho, who fixed her up. You may thank me now, maniac. I'm sorry to say this after you worked so hard, Jincho, but I don't own that fighter. I just picked it at random, Wyatt confessed sincerely. Wait, then where's your fighter? You're a pilot, ain't you? Jincho asked, puzzled. I just told you I don't own any fighter. Why would I? Wyatt explained. Told you, Jincho, but you wouldn't listen to me, said one of the human technicians. Pilots don't own their fighters unless a noble is so damn rich to afford one. Yeah, and most of them are racers or play dogfight arena, another one added. Royal Navy pilots can use any fighter available. You're telling me that I wasted more than a week of effort in a fighter that this maniac ruined and it isn't even his? Jincho cried out. I'm sorry, Wyatt offered, bemused by the smaller avian alien's reaction. You should have asked me for clarification or something. Jincho looked absolutely furious and ready to lay out a list of new curse worse, but instead of blowing out, he closed his eyes at the last moment before opening them a moment later. He took a step closer to Wyatt and pressed a finger against his stomach. Congratulations! That's your fighter now. You better not wreck her again that badly, wormbrain. I'll endeavor to try, Wyatt replied with a small smile. Say, Jincho, if you and your friends are as good as you claim, why would the hierarchy throw you out? Seems like a waste to me. How much do you know about the hierarchy? Asked Karatu, the tallest Ikanti of the group. Admittedly, not much, Wyatt began. I've met a few Ikantis over the years. I got along well with many maintenance workers during my time in the academy. Some never spoke about the hierarchy, but all of them hated it. I wouldn't say that we were friends or close in any measure, but we were amicable and they were pleasant to talk to. Not to mention that since they were neither nobles nor humans, I could at least express my thoughts more openly to them without being in constant vigil of my words, he added in his head. Ah, no wonder you're not asking who's female and who's male and all those silly questions you humans tend to ask when socializing, Zimu, the oldest of the group, said with a chuckle. So the hierarchy? Wyatt nodded once before continuing. As I understand it, the hierarchy works similarly to the principality's nobility system. Oh, and that military prowess and strength are more valued. Being a warrior and upholding a set code of rules and a rigid command structure is the pinnacle of normal Ikanti society, right? Bah! Bunch of stuck-up brutes that don't value intellect or innovation, always babbling about honor this, strength that. Glory above all, Jincho protested, making full use of his best mocking tone. The only intelligence they care about is how to fight and win battles. Savages, the lot of them. That's why we left and came here 10 years ago, been going from place to place until we landed on Woodshaft about 3 years back. The hierarchy may have better tech than the principality, but they're as stagnant as swamp water left to fester with a corpse in it. The rest of his Icanti companions made chittering noises of affirmation. Before he knew it, Wyatt relaxed and spent the next half an hour chatting with the technicians while they worked out. They talked about their daily lives, their work, and what they would be doing when they arrived at Matcha. That last part got him thinking about what he would do in turn. He hadn't had the time to think about anything except what he'd do throughout the day. Thinking about the future always seemed so useless to him. He had set a goal in mind and strived to achieve it, but anything else along the way was just white noise. Nothing assured his survival, less so thanks to Duke Draymore's betrayal. And so many things had changed so fast in his life. Now, the prospect of his future was abstract and even less tangible than it ever was when he was but a mere commoner. But the one thing that was clear in his mind was that he was going to send his family a message at the very least. Maybe even send them a video or a live call if he could afford it. He had nearly 30,000 credits saved up, and he deeply yearned to see their faces again after such a long time outside of his dreams and memories. He was in the middle of chatting with Feshik when he noticed Cynthia entering the gym, whilst two crewmen carried something following close behind her. "It seems I must go." "It was a pleasure meeting you all," Wyatt said with a friendly smile as he stood up and gave the technicians a short salute. Then he walked over to Cynthia, who, of course, had already seen him. A quick message from the guy who runs this channel. I'm excited to share that our channel now partners with the author of The Black Ship to share ad revenue. This collaboration ensures that the creative minds behind the stories we love are supported financially. Thank you for helping us give back to the author by watching and engaging with our content. Now let's get back to the story. "You're early," Cynthia commented as she continued to walk, undeterred. Wyatt joined her side. "Friends of yours?" "Hardly," Wyatt replied. "I wanted to know Jincho and the other Icantis better." "Are you favorable toward the aliens?" Cynthia asked in a nonchalant tone. Wyatt shrugged. "They're not Drazen, and they hate them with a passion. Besides, almost every Icanti I've met has been pleasant and cordial. I see no reason to dislike them." "Them? I agree. I am talking about the Icantis in general. Do you know about the hierarchy?" the blue-haired woman asked in that same tone. "Enough to not like it and understand why they left." Wyatt paused for a moment and then turned his gaze to Cynthia. "The principality and the hierarchy don't seem too different. Why are we hostile to each other at all when there are the Arabians and the Drazen out there?" "That, Wyatt, is a long and complicated answer that dates back several millennia and topics that, sadly, you do not have the clearance to know about. Be assured, however, that the hierarchy is much worse than what you believe it is," Cynthia replied, then turned to the two crewmen. "We'll be taking this arena. Make sure none disturb us." "Oh, of course, Lady Cynthia," one of the crewmen replied shakily. Cynthia grabbed the two small tubes the crewman had been carrying on a lavishly decorated red and golden pillow. With the press of a button, the two tubes extended out until they measured 2.5 meters in length. She grabbed one firmly while presenting the other to the black-haired pilot next to her. Blood left Wyatt's face while his eyes inspected the long, thick metal rod, and his imagination painted several scenarios for its use. None of them pretty. "We're not going to practice using these poles, are we?" he asked, his voice slightly shaky as the prospect of being beaten to a pulp by Cynthia with such a sturdy stick was incredibly unappealing. "Fret not, Wyatt, for this is not combat practice," she said without an ounce of humor in her voice. She then hit the ground once with the pole and stood firm, turning to face the pilot in full. "This is something far more important. You will master this performance before we arrive at Matcha. In a few hours, we shall jump to the Felicity system first and contact any Finnegan and Loyalist forces stationed there. Once we make landfall on Matcha, you shall stand alongside my princess." She's calling Clara by her title. She's being beyond serious with this, Wyatt thought, realizing the seriousness of the situation. Granted, he had no idea what sort of performance she was talking about, but he was sure he was about to discover it. Deciding that getting started was better for all involved, he put on his helmet and then hit the ground, doing his best to imitate Cynthia's stance. Understood, Lady Cynthia. I shall not bring shame to Princess Clara and House Astor." Pleased by his response, Cynthia nodded once. Observe what I do. Learn from it. Then, follow my motions. It is imperative that you master this march in the short amount of time available to us, Wyatt. We have less than 3 days. It shall be done, Wyatt replied, ready to do his best and go beyond that. How hard could learning a march be? Noer Navio, Command Bridge. Princess Clara Astor sat on the captain's chair while Redford and Cynthia stood next to her. Instead of putting on a dress, she chose to wear her armor instead for their entry into the Felicity system. If she was being honest with herself, she was both elated and nervous in equal measure. After barely escaping the clutches of her uncle, roaming the stars without stop for days on end whilst being hunted down, being rescued by a compost hauler who had proven himself to be not only useful, but a rapidly trusted and sincere friend, and then facing the might of the Kastans and the horrors of the Drazen, she was more than happy to find herself in friendly territory. But the nagging fear that something could go wrong again plagued her mind constantly thanks to the death of Frederick Anderson. The ramifications were many, and all of them were outside her control. All they could do, she concluded, was keep his death a secret for as long as possible and prepare a suitable response to House Anderson. Failure could see them siding with her uncle. Another great house deciding to support Duke Dramore's coup, this time out of scorn for the loss of a potential heir while under capture, could be devastating to the reputation of House Astor itself. It was the sort of diplomatic hellstorm that caused the previous civil war across the principality, setting it ablaze in the fires of petty squabbles and old feuds revived. Worst of all, there was not much she could do in her current predicament. Yet. Patience was her strongest virtue, and she knew how to wield it with the finesse of an assassin's dagger. Borrowing the perspective from a video feed, she saw Galt Tirome on his post, waiting silently and patiently to carry out his duty. Sparing his life had been the correct choice, and her gamble seemed to be paying off already. Then she saw Captain Milcades alongside half of the Royal Marines at her disposal, standing their ever-faithful vigil. And a little further back stood Wyatt Staples, silently watching and waiting. Seeing him brought a small smile to her lips. He truly was doing his best, despite the severe whiplash he was suffering, now that his worldview and his role in it had changed so abruptly in such a short span of time. But such was life, and Wyatt Staples had proven to be not only reliable, but that rarest treasure of all, a true, trusted friend she could rely upon. Returning to her own perception, she waited and waited for what felt like hours until the awaited ping made itself known. "My princess, we are being hailed," Galt announced. "Open the channel," she commanded, stealing her heart once more. A few seconds later, the large screen before her gave way to the image of an older man with a trimmed mustache wearing the uniform of an admiral. She recognized him immediately. "Admiral Joaquin Finnegan, it is good to see you in good health." "Princess Clara." The stern-looking, gruff admiral's expression shifted to one of joy when he recognized the figure sitting in the captain's chair. "My princess, have you been captured? Do you require assistance?" "Your concern is appreciated, Admiral, but I assure you I am neither a prisoner nor an impostor. This vessel was relinquished from the unworthy hands of the Kastan traitors, and I have taken command of it. Rejoice, Admiral, for my brother, the prince, shall arrive in mere hours. He awaits in the Roble system as we speak. No doubt you've detected our fleet's warp signatures?" Clara asked in a neutral but firm tone. Admiral Joaquin straightened his posture, retaking his noble air. "Forgive me for my outburst of joy, my princess. We feared the worst. Our reports were scattered and inconclusive outside our borders. We received 3 days ago a message from one Uriel Hoax describing that of your arrival at Jintrax's smuggler den and that you and His Majesty the Prince were on their way. We didn't believe it at first, but seeing you now in the flesh, my princess, the Principality is beyond relieved to see you safe and unharmed." The Admiral paused for a moment, his azure eyes flickering for a second before continuing. "We received reports of your fleet's warp signatures, and a task force was going to move and see who you were, but we were countermanded by Fleet Admiral Kisalto Lintar and Marchioness Amelia Finnegan after the second report came through. They believed that it was highly probable that the fleet were loyalist forces trying to remain hidden. We never suspected it was the prince's fleet in actuality, the aged man replied, relief clear in his voice despite how serious and professional he tried to appear. Clara frowned at the admiral's revelation. Admiral, what happened to Fleet Admiral Basako Winfield? He fell in battle with the highest of honors, my princess, the admiral replied. Admiral Casalto was forced to take the mantle of the Second Fleet's leadership after Fleet Admiral Basako perished during an assault carried by traitors' damnable black ships. I'm sorry to report that 2 battle cruisers, 4 heavy and regular cruisers, 10 destroyer-class vessels, and over 30 support and escort ships have been lost. We've inflicted casualties upon the traitors, including the destruction of at least 15 of their black ships and over 20 regular vessels. Sadly, the most significant loss they've received was the destruction of a battle cruiser and heavy damage to the battleship Unrelenting Valor. I see, Clara replied, taking in every word the admiral had said. I will inform Juliana of her uncle's demise. Have the Caiston traitors moved against your forces? We're locked in a stalemate, my princess. Our forces are scattered and spread thin. The bulk of our forces are made up from Second Fleet elements under Fleet Admiral Casalto Lintar. There are also stragglers from the 1st and 8th, with Rear Admiral Moreton Banta as the senior commanding officer of the 8th Elements and Vice Admiral Vashakati Reed under command of the 1st Elements. Several Royal Army elements have also remained loyal and are eager to engage the traitors, but we lack transport vessels. The precious few ships from the 4th and 7th Fleets present have joined Finnegan forces directly, while the majority of their forces are scattered across Calonne, Valto, and Winfield territories, as far as our intelligence reports indicate, the Admiral explained. But now that news of the prince's survival and arrival will spread across the principality, we can start pushing back against the traitors and that Draymore bastard. Excuse my outburst, my princess. There is no need to apologize. My uncle is a traitor and deserves little consideration in these dire times that he instigated. Every death is on his hands and that of his supporters, Clara replied in a neutral, practiced tone. Inform Marchioness Amelia Finnegan of our imminent arrival. At once, Your Majesty. However, may I ask why are you on board a black ship, my princess? Even with our scanners, it was hard to pinpoint the origin of the vessel's warp signature, Joaquin asked, intrigued. Thanks to the efforts of my Royal Marines and Lady Cynthia Winfield, we were able to capture 2 black ships. The smaller, crippled frigate class is in possession of my brother, while this vessel, renamed Nornavio, has become my personal flagship, Clara replied quickly and firmly. Understood, Your Majesty. I shall report this to Marchioness Amelia immediately. I'll order a dozen escort ships to meet the Nornavio at the middle point. Will this suffice, my princess? The Admiral asked. It is more than enough. Thank you, Admiral Joaquin. I look forward to setting foot on Macha soon, Clara said, and with that, the connection ended. A second later, she stood up and Redford took her place. Maintain course and inform me of any significant developments, Commander. My princess, Redford replied, bowing his head slightly. Captain Milcades, you and your troops may return to your duties. Cynthia, Wyatt, come, Clara ordered, and made her way out of the bridge, closely followed by the red-armored woman and the black-haired pilot. They made their way back to her quarters undisturbed by any other crew members and entered. Once the doors closed, she let out a long, tired sigh and placed a hand on her neck. Without saying a word, Cynthia approached from behind and gently rubbed the back of her neck for several seconds until an audible pop was heard. Better? Very much so. I wish there was a way to prevent stress from building up, Clara said, her tone back to her more cheerful, lively self. Then she turned to Wyatt and offered him a gentle smile. You know, you could stand closer to me the next time, Wyatt. You're under my direct service, are you not? I will remember that, Clara, Wyatt replied, feeling nervous. But would that be all right? Compared to Cynthia, Commander Redford, and the Royal Marines, I'm left wanting, he said, barely managing to avoid saying he was nothing instead. True, but I wish for you to stand at my side. I can't have my new star pilot and Knight Banneret on the sidelines now, can I? Clara ended with a playful giggle before taking a seat at her tea table. Tell me and be honest with me, Wyatt. How is your latest training going? The pilot reached for his helmet and removed it. It is agony, Wyatt answered in a heartbeat, which made the princess smirk at her blue-haired friend. For her part, Cynthia took off her helmet and gave him a sharp glare. "I'm following my princess's orders," he said, happy to get away with complaining a bit safely. "But Clara, is it really necessary for me to be a banner holder?" "Of course," Clara said, inviting him and Cynthia to sit down with a hand gesture. Her two friends took the invitation and joined her. "Once we arrive at Matcha, we'll wait for my brother's arrival. You, Wyatt, will be part of my escort. That is why you must learn how to do it properly." "Funny. Cynthia never mentioned anything about being part of your escort," Wyatt replied as he glanced at said woman. "It goes without saying," Cynthia replied with a hint of a smirk present on her lips. "Excuse me for my ignorance, but why is it so important? Is it like the parades House Arante organizes?" he asked curiously. "Not quite. This will not be a parade, but it certainly will be similar. This, my dear Wyatt, will be a rather simple royal procession." She paused for a moment to grab her chin between her index and thumb. "Marchioness Amelia would never let such an opportunity slip her fingers. I'm sure that after Joaquin delivers what had transpired, she'll do everything in her power to organize it on such short notice. It'll be fairly traditional, with my brother walking forth, flanked, and followed by his closest and most trusted advisors, followers, and allies. I will follow shortly after in much the same fashion. In comparison to my brother, only 4 banners shall join me. The banners of House Astor, House Winfield, the Royal Marines banner, and of course yours, my dear Wyatt." Wyatt felt dizzy and winded, as if something long, heavy, and sturdy had punched him in the gut. Only nobles were allowed to participate in the parades back on fire, while commoners cheered and admired it. Now that he fully digested what his role would be, and to what extent, he almost fainted right there and there, but managed to keep himself from embarrassing himself further. "Couldn't you tell me that earlier?" Wyatt shouted in his mind as he shot a shocked yet demanding glare at the blue-haired woman who, to be fair, blushed slightly and looked away, embarrassed. But I don't have a banner," was all he could stammer, but Clara, clearly having prepared for this revelation already, merely reached to her left and lifted a large sealed suitcase of sorts. "On the contrary, Wyatt, I've already approved your design and have taken the liberty to use the fabricator to make your first banner house. Go on, it is yours," she said before putting the suitcase on the empty table. Slowly and with shaking hands, Wyatt reached for the suitcase. He placed his thumb on the scanner and the lock clicked, disengaging. Opening the suitcase, he saw a neatly tucked piece of cloth with the head and neck of a white stag in the center of a black background. The stag had short antlers and a pair of extended wings sprouting from the sides, giving it a rather majestic appeal. Taking the banner out, he unfurled it to reveal it in full. There it was, the heraldic shield he'd spent several hours working on. He was careful to follow the advice of Commander Redford while keeping in mind what Galt Tyrone had told him. Of course, that did very little without a deeper understanding of how he was meant to do it properly. Thanks to Clara and her delivered data chit, that hurdle was easy to overcome. The chit contained a plethora of examples throughout the Principality's history and even before its founding. It also contained depictions of many types of shields, categories, decorations, and animals that, according to the information in the chit, were animals that existed in the distant homeworld of humanity, Earth. Not only that, each depiction also came with a brief description of what each one symbolized and represented. Choosing a stag had not been an easy decision, but he felt drawn to it the more he read through the information. Now that I see it in person, I feel almost embarrassed, like I'm pretending to be something that I'm not, but at the same time. I think it is rather fitting, Wyatt thought, whilst admiring the stag that was meant to symbolize strength, courage, humbleness, loyalty, and nobility. Not in the sense of actual nobility, but in the form of virtue and integrity. The wings on the stag represented not only his love for piloting, but a warning that while he was a man of peace, he would not hesitate to incur in battle. The shape of his shield was described as a 2-engrailed top design. It was simple but more refined than the simple heather shield he'd chosen before. At the top center of the shield and above the stag rested a gray Spartan helmet that went along well with the duality and intimidating appearance of the stag beneath it. Finally, on the right and left top sides of the shield, a white staple could be found on each side. There was no fanciful meaning behind them. It was a simple reminder of who he was, where he'd come from, and to never forget it. Outside, the rest of the flag was also white, giving full attention to the heraldic shield at its center. "Simple yet elegant. Nicely done, Wyatt," Cynthia praised, examining his banner. "I don't know what to say except, thank you, Clara. I don't know how, but I promise I'll pay you back someday for everything you've done for me. The chit, the armor, and now this banner. It couldn't be cheap." "Think nothing of the chit," Clara began. "It is nothing more than information already available to me. It cost me nothing to help you in that regard. The banner also cost me nothing. As captain of the Noir Navio, it is within my power to make use of the facilities as I wish. That armor is yours because you paid for it, Wyatt." Now it was Wyatt's turn to let out a laugh. "Clara, please, I'm not that stupid. I have no more than 30,000 credits to my name. Nowhere near enough to pay for such an armor, and I never made the purchase myself. I appreciate your generosity regardless, my princess." "Who said anything about generosity? I simply subtracted the amount from your account. Tell me, what was your salary as a warrant officer?" Clara asked, a cheeky smile forming on her lips. Cynthia shook her head but wasn't able to hide her small, playful smirk. "My salary was 800 credits a month," he answered, and his heart raced with anticipation. "Has my salary increased? As a lieutenant, your salary is now 4,000 credits a month. Furthermore, due to services rendered to the royal family and your outstanding courage, you've received a reward of 100,000 credits," Cynthia revealed, causing the pilot to sputter and mumble incoherently. "The armor you are wearing costs 50,000 credits and has already been subtracted." "That means I have over 70,000 credits at my disposal. I can afford to have a video call with my family for a few minutes," Wyatt thought with a triumphant smile spreading across his face. He was about to thank Clara for it, but the princess beat him to the punch. "Save your thanks for when they have meaning and merit, my dear Wyatt. This was nothing more than what was needed. Moreover, perhaps you should check your credit chit," Clara proposed, her smile widening whilst Cynthia passed him a data pad. Not bothering to question her motives, Wyatt took out his credit chit and inserted it into the data pad. He never bothered to check his account more than once or twice each month, if that. He accessed his personal account, and true as the daylight, there it was. 78,242 credits. But something was wrong. He blinked twice, set the data pad down, and rubbed his eyes before picking it back up. There was no mistaking it. There was a 0 next to the 7, followed by a comma and a 6 after it. 6 million cred, he muttered in disbelief before his body gave up and he leaned back on his seat, passing out. Clara let out a rather pleased sigh as she giddily clapped her hands together. "I rather enjoy when he does that." Cynthia shook her head again. "Your senseless teasing and peculiar brand of humor are going to end up killing him, Clara." "Shush you," Clara exclaimed, her cheeks blushing, but her smile never faltered. "Don't lie to me, Cynthia. I can see your smile." "I refuse to acknowledge that statement," Cynthia replied. "When he wakes up, you'll have to instruct him on how to employ his newfound wealth." "I've already taken that into account," the princess answered, leaning back in her seat to relax. Her gaze focused on the unconscious pilot for a moment, before moving past him and saw a small collection of fighter models resting inside an encased model rack. She loved every one of them and never traveled anywhere without them. It had been a small miracle that a handful of her collection had survived at all during their escape. But recently, a certain model had become her new, most precious possession. "We should smile now that we can, Cynthia, for tomorrow is anything but certain." On this channel, we've amassed an extensive library of sci-fi and HFY content spanning thousands of hours, all available for your listening pleasure right now. Take a moment to explore our catalog and discover your new favorite story. You can find links to each story featured in this mosaic in the description below. Remember, what you see here is just a glimpse of the vast array of content we offer.